and we're beginning to see the front end of what Frederic is going to be like.
Should complete all necessary precautions by early afternoon.
Hurricane Frederic will come to shore. However, how much damage he does will depend on how well Gulf Coast residents are prepared.
There was little to do now but wait. Wait and hope and pray.
For the rest of our lives, we will tell where we were and what we experienced as Frederic's winds of destruction descended upon us.
It may be years before we're able to assess all the damage caused by those winds of destruction that roared through coastal Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida during the darkness of September 12th and 13th. For most of us, during the pre-dawn hours, there were times when we felt isolated.
40 years ago, devastation along the Gulf Coast. This following Frederic's winds of destruction.
Thousands of people watching the track of that hurricane, having no idea it would be quite as powerful as it was.
Yeah, people there facing the classic and sometimes life-threatening dilemma: leave or ride it out.
Our chief meteorologist, Jason Smith, has a look at what Hurricane Frederic was packing.
Frederic came on shore September 1979 with sustained winds of 130 miles per hour. It was the first hurricane to directly strike Mobile in 47 years. When you look at the video from those days, it's clear how far forecasting has come. Agencies track the progress of the storm by writing on a map. Exactly where Frederic would make landfall seemed to be anybody's guess. In downtown Mobile, a familiar scene, boarding up to keep glass from flying, and people checking the newspaper for the latest headlines. By the afternoon of September the 12th, all doubts about where Frederic was headed had been removed. Mobile and Baldwin counties were in the crosshairs.
At the present time, it's only 80 miles south of the Alabama coast. Let's take a look now at the latest coordinates as we have them as of 6 p.m. this evening.
Thousands left the coast for higher and supposedly safer ground. Some left messages behind for the unwanted intruder. Public shelters were full of people thinking of home.
Are you worried a lot about your house while you're gone?
Yes, in a way. Well, not too much.
Dauphin Island was the most vulnerable area. Despite official warnings, some diehards decided to ride it out on the slender strip of sand. As time ran out, everyone else got off the island. It would be a very long night.
The tropical system crept closer, and with forecasts not nearly as accurate as they are now, the Fox 10 staff had just days to prepare.
And for some, like Renee Dials and Kelly Jones, it was their first hurricane experience, both just starting their journalism careers.
Fox 10's Joe Emer talking to them today about what it was like 40 years ago.
Officials here at the Weather Service predict Hurricane Frederic.
Before coming to Mobile, reporter Renee Dials, then Renee Perry, was a young producer in Detroit. Kelly Jones had just graduated and gotten the anchor job, but was born in San Diego. Neither knew quite what to expect from a hurricane.
Everywhere it gets thunderstorms and rain, so I wasn't really that nervous about it. I mean, it's gonna rain, so whatever.
Back then, a storm wasn't predicted weeks in advance, but just days. 3 days, in fact, for Frederic. Kelly remembers meteorologist Ned Permey's announcement to the newsroom.
And we had the old-fashioned teletype machines with a lot of loud noises, and he comes walking in and he's just white as a sheet, and he says, "It's coming right up Mobile Bay."
Renee was sent out to report as Frederic barreled toward Mobile.
The wind is different than, you know, when you're in a regular storm. You know that you're going to have windy days, but it is very intense when you're talking about a major hurricane, and that kind of caught me by surprise.
Meanwhile, Kelly was preparing back at the Fox 10 studio on Government Street downtown.
It never occurred to anyone that maybe we would be in danger in downtown Mobile. Now, no one ever brought it up. It was just like, we've got a job to do, we've got information to put out.
While Kelly stayed, Renee was sent home. She had a 6-month-old baby to take care of and thought her husband was gone on business. To her relief, when she got home, he was back boarding up windows.
And he was very calm because this was his area where he lived. And so he kind of slept through the storm. And I was like, did you hear that? Did you hear that? Did you see? And it's going to be okay, but I was just a nervous wreck.
Back at the station, the 6 o'clock news.
I will never forget the anchor, Bill Stewart, saying wind speeds are now 75 miles per hour in downtown Mobile. Hurricane Frederic has arrived.
Shortly after the broadcast, boom, lights out. It was pitch black, but that was just the beginning.
Then I heard the bricks falling around, and I said, well, a wall has collapsed. No, because water started pouring in from the ceiling. And then I thought, we're in trouble. We have to evacuate.
In darkness, Kelly and the Fox 10 crew, led by engineer Reno Robinson, held hands trying to get out of the building. When they did, more danger.
He got us all out, and we were still holding hands, and we looked up at Government and Joachim Street, and we saw the traffic light just swaying roughly, just going like this, going crazy. Then suddenly, it wrenched itself free and crashed right in front of Reno.
A near miss. Meanwhile, more near misses back in Renee's neighborhood.
There were a lot of pine trees, and they just kind of fell all around the houses, but they didn't necessarily hit the houses, and that was a really good thing.
Downtown, the Fox 10 crew had made it into the Admiral Sims hotel lobby.
Glass was breaking all around us, and no one wanted to be cut or injured.
Finally, the storm passed. When they got back to Fox 10, most of the equipment was destroyed. Within a day, though, crews were back out reporting on the storm, and the next night, Kelly Jones was back in the anchor chair.
We're going to sit you behind the desk with one light showing you, and with one of our studio cameras, and you're going to talk for 28 minutes, and you're going to show the video. So anybody that's watching us can see what we gathered that day.
Like so many, Kelly and Renee will never forget Frederic.
I don't take any warning of any type of tropical storm activity lightly anymore.
It was, for me, it was the worst.
The first storm and the worst storm of their 40-plus years each in broadcasting. Joe Emer, Fox 10 News.
And they weren't the only ones who remember what it was like before Frederic hit.
Right. Steve Alexander catches up with some local leaders who recall September 1979 vividly.
The neighborhood I lived in, which was Brookwood neighborhood. Mayor Sandy Stimson says he was living in the Brookwood neighborhood of Mobile when Frederic hit.
The storm was coming in. We had boarded up the house. At that time, we had a 1.5-year-old child, and she was 7 months pregnant. She really didn't want to stay in town. She wanted to go home to Bruton, but I convinced her to stay.
Then the mayor says the storm came in.
Limbs banging against the side of the house, the little greenhouse out back, blew away. And she said, I slept through it all, that I slept through it all.
Stimson says when they woke up the next morning, he saw almost every house had some type of damage, and his home had roof damage. The mayor also said plenty of trees were down, but fortunately, they fell between houses instead of on them. And Stimson remembered being impressed by how neighbors looked out for each other.
Everybody started helping each other clean their yards up, and how everybody was emptying their freezers and starting to have, barbecues and just cooking all the food.
Trees and food were part of the memories for Public Safety Director James Barber, too.
My house was mainly trees that had been felled that needed to be cleared, and so there was a lot of debris. But also remembered being without power for 2 weeks. But everybody ate real good because we cleaned out all the freezers and started cooking.
City Council member Fred Richardson says he left Mobile before Frederic hit and went to Conecuh County, where he was born. Richardson remembers his first thoughts upon returning home.
When I got to our street, our kids started screaming and hollering because trees had covered everything. I couldn't see my house. Because we had lots of trees down there. Trees were everywhere, and they didn't think we could live there anymore, so they were just, what we gonna do?
Mobile City Clerk Lisa Lambert was in high school when Frederic hit and remembers dealing without one basic necessity.
We were out of electricity for a long time, and we had really long lines to get ice. I guess it's the Corps of Engineers provided ice trucks and all, and they came up several times to provide ice because we were out of electricity for so long.
Memories of Frederic. Memories they hope won't be repeated. Steve Alexander, Fox 10 News.
Experts tracked Frederic for nearly 2 weeks, starting the minute it formed into a depression on August 29th.
And all the people along the coast heeding the warnings early. Hundreds of thousands of them evacuating.
Meteorologist Michael White with the story of the rush to just get out of harm's way.
With Frederic creeping closer and closer, thousands of residents decided not to risk it and instead packed up and hit the road.
Please be evacuated now before all roads become completely impassable.
So many people throwing their most precious belongings in their cars and driving away, not knowing what they would be coming back to once Frederic made its mark.
I'm scared the roof or something will blow.
Alabama Governor Fob James ordered the evacuation of the low-lying coastal areas, and many took those warnings to heart. Much of the Gulf Coast soon looking like a ghost town.
The last of the residents on that end of the island came out by Army truck this morning. There is a ghostly look about this normally active island. Houses deserted, no traffic except law enforcement vehicles.
Thousands of people getting as far away from the bullseye as they could. Many others, not wanting to leave the area completely, found their way to shelters. But some hunkered down and prayed for the best.
The island has now been sealed off and lies awaiting the fury of Hurricane Frederic.
More than 500,000 people evacuated from the central Gulf Coast region ahead of Frederic. Up to that time, it was the largest evacuation ever along the Gulf Coast.
Tracking these types of systems might seem easier with today's technology, but just think back 40 years.
Meteorologist Matt Barentine breaks down the difference between forecasting then and now, and the errors that could have been devastating. That's next.
It all began on August 30th when a tropical depression was spotted off the African coast more than 1,000 miles from Mobile. It grew into a tropical storm, then became a full-fledged hurricane. It had become obvious that our viewing area would bear the brunt of the storm.
40 years ago, hurricane forecasting wasn't anything close to an exact science.
Yeah, even just a few days out, the path of Frederic was full of uncertainty.
Meteorologist Matt Barentine shows you the startling advances in forecasting that have been made in recent decades.
Forecasting hurricanes has come a long way since 1979 when Hurricane Frederic hit. Back then, the average one-day error was 97 miles. That would take you from Dauphin Island all the way over to Destin. These days, that error is 40 miles, which takes you from Dauphin Island about to the state line. But this doesn't tell the whole story because that 40 miles is from a spot. It could be north, south, east, or west. We're actually talking about radii of circles. And we're talking about square mileage. That one-day error now was around 5,000 square miles. But back in 1979, it was 30,000 square miles. So we're talking a six-fold improvement in hurricane forecasting for storms that are one day out. Currently, our three-day forecast is very similar to that one-day forecast back in 1979. But check out the three-day forecast back in 1979, 230,000 square miles, nearly the size of Texas. So a storm could have been anywhere in there, and that was how large the uncertainty was back 4 decades ago. Certainly a good thing that hurricane forecasting has improved quite a bit since those days. In Mobile, Matt Barentine, Fox 10 News.
So many people remember Frederic from the time it was just a tropical system up until it was a full-fledged hurricane.
And wait until you hear some of those who were right in the middle of all the action, and they look back at what it was like 40 years ago.
At the time Hurricane Frederic was approaching the area, Channel 10 News crews were on the streets taking a look at the preparations.
Our Shelby Myers takes a trip down memory lane with a former WALA meteorologist who was right in the middle of the madness.
When Hurricane Frederic made its beeline for Mobile County, former WALA chief meteorologist John Ed Thompson thought he was ready.
The night it was about to make landfall, Kent Morton and I were at the transmitter, and we were there just as a backup. If anything failed at the studio, they would throw it to the transmitter.
But nothing could prepare him for what was to come.
At about 10:15 p.m. that night, the wall In the sports office, which was on the second floor above the newsroom, the wall collapsed and rain started coming into the sports room and through the floor into the editing bays downstairs. Well, when that happened, they threw it to the transmitter. They said, we've had a wall collapse and we're going to the transmitter. And we're going, Kent and I are going, you know.
The transmitter was in Baldwin County. With the help of then WALA assignment editor Kent Morton, Thompson says he was on air throughout the night and into the morning. No idea of the danger they were in themselves.
We kept hearing thump, 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 and it was pine trees hitting the ground all around the transmitter. And one thing we didn't really know at the time was that the tower that went right beside the transmitter house was designed not to fall, but to collapse straight down. And we were in the building right below the tower all night long.
Luckily, the tower never fell and Thompson was able to stay on air.
It was a harrowing night and it went into the next day.
The eye of Frederic passing directly over Dauphin Island.
The most impressive thing was the Dauphin Island Bridge, because big chunks of the concrete were just lifted off and thrown in the water.
His own home on the island taking a beating. The only way he could get back to fix it was by a ferry. Thompson says seeing Mobile County rally together in Frederick's aftermath is what stands out the most to him.
People's freezers were not with power, and so they had all that meat in their freezer. So what a lot of people did, since they were going to lose it, they cooked it. And they brought their gas grills out, and neighborhoods were having, hey, you want to eat chicken today? Come on over to my house. And, you know, people were helping people, you know. Yeah.
Shelby Myers, Fox 10 News.
Next, just another incredible survival story. A local woman remembering what it was like to face Frederic.
And face it, she did, as her home was shaking to pieces. Her family had to get out into the storm just to get to their neighbors. So many things have changed in 40 years, but the memories from those who rode out Frederic etched in their minds forever.
Yeah, Joe Amer with the story of one local woman who remembers having to evacuate in the middle of a storm.
The sun was shining on Wednesday, September 12th. Elaine Carter was excited her 15th birthday was just days away. But by night, the sun yielded to the storm. Her excitement turned to fear.
The winds picked up. The house started shaking and moving.
This is that house rebuilt off Cody Road. When Hurricane Frederic hit in 1979, Elaine was inside with two sisters, a brother, and her parents. 6 people whose lives were in grave danger.
My dad made the conscious decision for us to go ahead and leave.
There is nothing but open road in front of their house. Nothing to stop or slow the hurricane force winds.
We wasn't sure if their house was going to be any more sturdier than ours, but we had to take a chance.
They opened the back door, lives on the line, about 60 feet to get to their neighbors.
It seemed like it was so far away because the wind was so strong. So we went along and pulled ourselves along the gate so we wouldn't lose our footing.
But they did lose their footing. The kids were young, most weighing less than 100 pounds.
Our legs were literally lifting off of the ground, and my dad had us, myself and my sister, in his arms holding us.
Dad wasn't the only hero.
My mom was in the front leading the way with my baby sister, and we made it to the neighbor's house.
Finally, the storm passed and dawn broke. They went outside and saw what was left of their home.
One side of our roof was on one side of the house, and the other side was literally, they were standing on both sides of the house. So we didn't have a roof, and everything inside of the house was damaged.
The house destroyed, but the entire family safe, alive. Elaine believes that would not have been the case if her dad had not made the call to flee to their neighbors.
He saved our lives by making that decision.
Joe Emer, Fox 10 News.
Well, the house was paid for, but without insurance, they had to take out a loan.
Yeah, the dad stayed to rebuild the house. Elaine and the rest of the family moved to California. Hurricane Frederic splitting their house in two and splitting the family across the country.
But after more than a year, the house was rebuilt, the family finally together again, back home.
So many incredible stories of survival during the approach and landfall of powerful Hurricane Frederic.
And we're only just halfway through. Just as dramatic, the aftermath.
Destruction is everywhere.
None of us will ever forget that night.
This is, I think, one of the worst crimes of all for somebody to come in and take advantage of a disaster.
It may be years before we're able to assess all the damage caused by those winds of destruction.
An island changed forever. Some areas nearly unrecognizable. Residents' lives uprooted, weeks and weeks without power.
Yeah, many just desperate for help. The aftermath of Frederic, life-altering. All of that and much more in part 2 when we continue to track winds of destruction. Hurricane Frederic, 40 years later.
Everywhere one looked, there was destruction.
Part of our house is on the back side of that road there.
The winds of Frederic took the lives of 5 people. One was a 4-year-old child.
Port City was struck hardest by Hurricane Frederic, and yet the death count is relatively low. However, that's not to say that Mobilians haven't suffered.
It may be years before we're able to assess all the damage caused by those winds of destruction that roared through coastal Alabama, Mississippi, and Florida during the darkness of September 12th and 13th. For most of us, during the pre-dawn hours, there were times when we felt isolated.
Decades ago, one of the most powerful hurricanes to strike Mobile roared ashore.
Frederic was a direct hit for Mobile Bay and left lasting memories, due in part to those winds of destruction.
Dauphin Island was almost completely destroyed. By some miracle, 26 people who had elected to stay on the island survived, just barely. The Dauphin Island Marina was in shambles. The causeway, the only link to the island, was destroyed.
Jutting out into the Gulf, Dauphin Island getting the worst of Frederic.
Oh, it certainly did. The island devastated, cut off, changed forever.
Fox 10 meteorologist Matt Barentine spoke to folks who remember that vividly.
I think I lost around about 20 to 25 big pines that was on this lot. They was broke half in two.
Tommy Gibbs moved to Dauphin Island in the late 1950s and worked for the water and sewage plant. He evacuated before Frederic hit and returned to an island that had been battered. His work restoring infrastructure carried him all over the island, and he documented the devastation with his camera.
There was a man had a Cadillac, and he lost it in that cut right there. It washed out the bulkhead on it and cut a big hole down through there, and the man's Cadillac went in that hole right there.
So whatever the storm moved.
Long before he was Dauphin Island's mayor, in 1979, Jeff Collier was a teenager seeing his life turned upside down. These days, he drives around and reminisces about Frederic.
I think the thing that was most shocking to us in coming back was the fact that we couldn't get back.
The bridge to the island, built in the late 1950s, was gone, and without it, it was like the island went back in time.
Without the bridge and with the ferry system, we could only carry so many vehicles, and with a 2-hour trip one way, you just change your whole lifestyle pattern. I mean, you might go once every week or even 2 weeks, and when you went, you did everything at once.
It took nearly 3 years to build a new bridge. It also took months to restore full power, making generators a necessity. Mayor Collier said people worked together to get by, and while the challenges of Frederic are in the past, Collier worries about what's in the island's future.
We all know that living on a barrier island, that these things can and ultimately will happen. We just hope it's not this year, or the next year, or not in our lifetime. And the fact that Dauphin Island is much more vulnerable now than it's ever been because of erosion and other issues, just the mere fact that we've had so many storms, Dauphin Island is not as resilient as it used to be, and therefore it takes a much less storm to create bigger damage for us, and that is a concern of mine.
One of the most visible scars of Hurricane Frederic that you can still see is at the end of Dauphin Island Parkway. Believe it or not, the road used to go all the way from Mobile to Dauphin Island, but 40 years ago, Hurricane Frederic changed that and washed away the bridge over the canal. That bridge was never rebuilt. A taller bridge up the canal on Rangeline Road was more practical. Hurricane Frederic, 40 years gone, but not forgotten. The testimonies of those who experienced it, a warning for current and future residents. On Dauphin Island, Matt Barentine, Fox 10 News.
The trees that had provided so much of the area's beauty had been used by Frederic as battering rams.
Down trees damaging, but also the 100+ mile-per-hour winds.
Yeah, those gusts overturning a mobile home in Grand Bay, killing a 4-year-old. Brendan Kirby has the story.
Eula Arlene Beausarge, just 4 at the time, hunkered down with her mother and sister inside the trailer home of a friend in Grand Bay on September 12th. Her death that terrible evening was the only one in Alabama directly attributed to the storm. Eula's father, Lawrence Beausarge, never has talked publicly about that storm until now. He recalls trying to get his ex-wife to stay with him, his brother, and his mother.
I tried to get her to come to the house where we were at.
Miles away, Beausarge could only hope and pray as the storm inflicted a beating on southern Mobile County.
We would open the front door and it sounded like a train coming. You could hear the pine trees outside snap just like a pencil.
Back at the trailer on Bow Road Extension near Ramsey Road, Linda Beausarge tried to get Eula and her 6-year-old sister to go to the safest part of the trailer. But the sister, Jenny Williams, now 46 and living in Pascagoula, recalls Eula running to the kitchen instead.
My sister wasn't wanting to go to the bathroom, to the bathtub, so the trailer started shaking and stuff, and everything just started tilting, and all I remember is it just started turning over.
Williams says her mother managed to get her to the car in a last-minute attempt to flee the winds, but the trailer flipped before Eula could get out. Lawrence Beausarge says his ex-wife had trouble finding the little girl in the darkened trailer.
She was hollering, but she couldn't find her. She didn't know where she was.
Frantically, Linda Beausarge tried to follow the little girl's voice.
She could hear her. She didn't have no flashlight. She could hear her, but she couldn't see her. By then, the refrigerator had fell on.
Beausarge is 71 now, a retired shrimper living in Coden. But even after 40 years, he says, the pain of that night never goes away. He recalls how Eula would climb on top of him while he relaxed on a recliner.
Baby, get up here and just rub my face. And she tell me she loved me. At 4 years old.
Little Eula's final resting place is here, on a family plot in an unmarked grave. Beausarge says his daughter's grave has no headstone because he couldn't afford to buy one at the Oddfellows Cemetery in Biola Battery, where his mother and brother also are buried.
It's not good, when you lose someone like that. You can lose your house, and you can rebuild.
But Beausarge knows there's nothing that could replace the girl he called his angel.
It was devastating.
Reporting from South Mobile County, Brendan Kirby, Fox 10 News.
5 deaths were blamed on Frederic. A storm surge of 12 to 15 feet on Gulf beaches and 8 to 10 in northern Mobile Bay, destroying numerous coastal buildings.
Frederic was the first hurricane to directly hit Mobile in nearly 50 years. More than 500,000 people evacuated from the central Gulf Coast region ahead of the storm. Up to that time, it was the largest evacuation along the Gulf Coast.
A monumental ordinance is now in place because of Hurricane Frederic.
And wait until you hear about the way the victims are protected now. All this after scammers were taking advantage of the most desperate 40 years ago.
Hurricane Frederic, when it was all said and done, was a costly hurricane. In fact, the damage for our section of the Gulf Coast was in the billions. And back in 1979, that dollar figure, once Frederic was over with, was $2.3 billion. But that was in 1979. If we factor in inflation, in 2019 dollars, that cost becomes $8.1 billion in damage as a result of Hurricane Frederic.
That costly damage and destruction not the only problem people were facing.
Yeah, many just desperate for basics like water or ice. But that also brought out the bad guys.
The price gougers, the profiteers who are selling essential things like ice and generators and gasoline and candles, are gouging the public by charging 2 or 3 or 4 times what the price should be.
During Frederic, the price gouging ordinance went into effect to make it illegal to sell those essential items for more than the average retail price.
That law still in effect even today, so the most vulnerable don't get taken advantage of.
Help after Frederic pouring in, bringing the community closer together.
Yeah, that show of strength not only evident in the cleanup efforts, but also in the resilience and gratefulness for life itself.
How faith shined in the midst of Frederic. That's next.
Damages from Frederic reaching over $2 billion. Downed trees, blocked roads, falling onto dozens of homes and businesses, and knocking down many power lines.
Yeah, some people without electricity for up to 5 weeks. The scars from Frederic showing in the homes destroyed and lives changed.
But then there are stories of hope and images like this.
The Sunday after the disaster, churches across Frederick's path, some damage still filled with people expressing thanks for their lives.
Our Shelby Myers has the then and the now.
Sunlight poured through a gaping hole in the front section where part of the front roof and wall had caved in under Frederic's forceful winds.
From about the bottom of the glass up was just blown out and laying in the yard. Just a pile of debris.
The view of Parish Hall inside Trinity Episcopal Church now,
and this is where we worship,
a lot different than Bill Suffich remembers it 40 years ago.
The split down the middle of the roof where he had lifted up to let the pressure out, and of course this side over here was blown up and you could see sky there. A lot of debris, everything was wet, and all the wind and rain. It was a mess. It was just tragic.
The same inside the chapel where Frederic left his mark.
The morning after the storm, Carol and I came down here. Ben McGinnis was standing on the corner across the street when we walked up. He was the rector and he lived about 2 blocks away. And he was standing on the corner shaking his head. I'm sure thinking, what am I going to do now?
A few blocks down the street, Central Presbyterian Church was also severely damaged. 4 giant stained glass windows, which now lay shattered on the ground.
When I came down here and saw daylight through the church, I almost collapsed.
Start all over again, just like we did at the beginning.
And with the help of people from all over, starting over is what both congregations did.
There was tremendous outpouring, and the church over months, there was national news, and we received letters, checks, just from all over the country. It was just unbelievable, really.
A few months post-Frederic, Trinity Episcopal Church returned to worship in its captivating sanctuary once again. But it would take a while for things to return to normal.
We did have to wait on this on the spire, the steeple, it was twisted and was unsafe. The crane was brought in and it was lifted off and laid down in the front yard.
Suffich has spent nearly a lifetime at Trinity Episcopal, entering the doors at 3 years old and later bringing his future wife to a midnight Christmas service on their first date. Through it all, his faith stands as strong as his church. Shelby Myers, Fox 10 News.
More incredible stories ahead for you. Wait until you see more of how Frederic left its mark.
We even see this hurricane through the eyes of the youngest residents. That's next. Hurricane Frederic definitely left its mark on the Gulf Coast.
Many of the stories of survival and rebuilding are housed in downtown's History Museum of Mobile.
As Fox 10's Lee Peck shows us, it's a building that also has a story to tell.
With its wide arches and ornate architecture, the History Museum of Mobile is one of the port city's most iconic and oldest buildings. Pictures of its transformation over the years displayed throughout the inside.
City Hall was constructed originally as 3 separate buildings.
Mobile native Scott Corcoran knows the port city's history and has always had a fascination with the impact left behind by Hurricane Frederic.
It was really the defining storm of, modern Mobile.
These pictures show the damage to the building in the days after the storm.
The entire roof of the southern wing had been knocked down. It took about $4.3 million to renovate this building, and construction took about 3.5 years.
Memories from Frederic woven into the fabric of Mobile. Research historian Charles Torrey remembers the storm very well.
Frederick's scars will take years to heal, and it did.
Looking through the archives, he too recalls picking up the pieces and starting over.
It was a mess. The roof was gone off of this wing that we're sitting at.
In his late 20s at the time, Torrey was working in a different department of the city and remembers delivering ice to those in need following Frederic.
Everybody has memories of their particular storm. A particular storm will imprint itself forever.
Well, the storm also had a huge impact on Mobile County students. Their experience is part of a collection of stories, poems, and pictures at the museum. Another picture shows downed trees, signs that read "Ready for Freddie." Fred was here. Another student writes in a very telling account, the moment the storm was passing over, he and his family, we shut ourselves up in the hall with all the doors shut with a mattress on top of us. We could hear the roof popping. We knew it was going at any minute. In their own words, through a child's eyes, Frederic comes to life in poems like this. On Wednesday night, Frederic was a fright. He didn't blow down just one thing. Freddie blew down everything in sight. With the worst left behind, the storm also brought out the best in mankind.
People helped people. They cared about people. They did whatever they could for each other.
For those who lived through it, Frederic has stayed with them 40 years later.
Just individual stories from those who survived and endured the storm, and everyone has been a story of kind of resiliency, of growing through it and making a new Mobile.
A city that continues to endure storm after storm. In downtown Mobile, Lee Peck, Fox 10 News.
And we've posted those letters and pictures, poems too, from Mobile County school children on our website.
And if you know who they are, contact us because we'd like to talk to them.
So many memories tied to Frederic, but what about the change because of it?
Next, we're looking ahead to see what the system made our local leaders reevaluate and even correct.
So what has the Gulf Coast learned from Hurricane Fredric's winds of destruction, and what plans are in place since then? Steve Alexander breaks it all down.
First, Mobile City leaders acknowledge there's only so much you can do to protect against a storm as powerful as Hurricane Frederic.
As far as damage, I don't know that we would be able to protect ourselves from damage, except for the new building codes may limit some of that.
But as far as the city's ability to prepare for a hurricane and respond to its impact, authorities believe Mobile is far better off now than it was in 1979.
A lot of it has to do with the communication systems that we have.
In the area of communication, the city has a joint operation command center at police headquarters and a command control board coordinating police, fire, public works, and other agencies.
Every situation that's called in, whether it's a tree down or something's happened to a car, flooded out, no matter what it is, it goes onto this big screen, and so we can start moving assets, to take care of it.
The goal? Fast response.
Our ability to track storm-related incidents as they occur and be able to deploy resources very rapidly to mitigate those situations.
Items that need action are marked in red. Those that have been taken care of, like a fallen tree, are marked in green. City officials say preparation is also important in cases where a hurricane could potentially cause a lot of flooding.
Drainage has been improved, but even pre-landfall, Public Works has a lot of things to prepare on a pre-landfall situation as far as making sure the storm drains are clear of debris or leaves. And the forestry division goes out and looks for weak trees or anything that may impede power lines, for instance.
City leaders believe preparation, communication, and coordination will make a difference if a major hurricane hits Mobile again. Steve Alexander, Fox 10 News.
The loss of any one life is so tragic as to defy any measurement, but using the numbers that we live by every day, one can only say that the residents who lived in the area attacked by Hurricane Frederic are lucky. The numbers of our neighbors who died, when compared to Hurricane Camille, are relatively small. We have also experienced the caring and the graciousness of our neighbors in this state and all across the nation. And we've also had an opportunity to test our own mettle. We have shown that we have the ability to endure, the ability to exist, and the ability to rebuild. Out of all of this has come a stronger sense of community. Frederic's winds of destruction have gone. They're no longer with us. And they left behind a clear sky and a promise for a better tomorrow.
A tomorrow that's brought progress, change, excitement. A tomorrow that has brought growth, experience, hope. And the Gulf Coast continues to endure and thrive 40 years after Hurricane Frederic's winds of destruction.